This lesson covers constructors. We used only default constructor previously. Let's look at the idea of constructors. Initialize instance variable of objects. Sometimes we say the initialize objects. So instance variable belongs to objects. When we say variable, we are referring to class variable that belongs to class. Again, when we define an object reference variable called myCircle, the syntax looks like this one, semicolon. Then we have class called circle. There is only one data field called radius. Default value for radius is 0.0 because it's a double data type. That is again data field, what we call it as a class variable. We can construct objects based on this class using U operator with a default constructor called circle. Sometimes we say that it is no argument constructor or default constructor. So if I put it together, after we define myCircle object reference variable, maybe here, we can assign a new object using U and circle constructor, circle default constructor. So assignment means we can report to our class. So let me visualize it. So if you're using default constructor, we have a circle. We have one data field called radius, because radius has a default value 0.0. So radius is 0, so circle object exists as a myCircle, but in terms of visual, you won't be able to see that. So let me give you another object. If you construct an object with a radius 3.0, of course you can see your objects on your screen. Again, when radius 3.0. So there are two different ways of constructing myCircle object. We can define the object reference variable and assign with one argument, which is 3.0 this time. Or we can use the single step. Circle, missing C, sorry. New circle, and we have one parameter, 3.0. So this case, we are not using default constructor. Default constructor has no arguments. So now we can construct an object with initial value to instance variable of an object. In this case, we are looking at the my circle. Let me construct a new class. Okay, I'll leave it. Then I will demonstrate it, how to use default constructor or constructor with a parameter. I will say circle application. Let's create a circle class. So one data field called radius. I will say double. 0.0, sorry. Then let me introduce one set and get method. Because if we don't define any constructor, we have to use default constructor. It means if you want to assign new value for your object, you need a method called set radius. If you want to access the data, of course you need a get radius method as well. I think it's a double. So we have one pair of method for radius. Let's construct the object using default constructor. So it means that if we don't define any constructor in circle class, implicitly we are saying that we are using default constructor or no argument constructor. Or you can say that if you don't define anything by yourself, it comes with your class comes with a default constructor. So here I will say circle, my circle, new circle. I'm not going to use any parameter. It means I'm using default constructor here. So we don't have any constructor here. So if you define default constructor by yourself, it will be looks like this. Modifier called public and circle and no implementations. Let's print here a radius. So we have 0.0. Then, of course, if you want to change the value of radius, you have to use method called setRadius. Again, that's all you can do with the default constructor. So the question is, when we construct objects, can we actually have a value 3.0 for radius of that particular MyCircle object? That means you need to have another constructor. That constructor allows us to use a parameter. So that's the idea of constructors here. So 3 or 5.0. We don't have this constructor, so it will complain. They say you have the constructor objects, 5.0, yeah, with a double theta type. So if you come down here, you say public. Let me put the comments prompt first. So let's say one with the radius parameter, or radius as a parameter. Circle, I will use the same style, double, new radius. So that when we use constructor with one parameter, it will allow us to use one parameter. Let me name it as a different object, MyCircle number 2. So this time we are constructing objects. Let me print it out one more statement. Maybe I will just copy paste it. Change to MyCircle number 2. So here we have two objects. One is using setRadius method so that we can change the value of MyCircle object. The second one, we construct objects using different constructor or constructor with additional parameter. So we did that with one single step. So general idea is you may have a class, you may have multiple constructors. So if you don't specify anything, we are referring to default constructor, whether you implicitly leave it as it is, or explicitly you can define. The question is, can I not to define? And then can I use default constructor? We won't be able to do so. So if you want to use a default constructor only, you may have option to not to define at all. But if you want to use a default constructor with other constructors, then you must define. Again, if you need it, you need to define explicitly. If you don't need any other constructor, then you can leave it as optional. So if I remove these, all of them, can I just use the default constructor? Of course you can, but if you need to use different constructor, I highly recommend you to explicitly write a default constructor as well. So here is some guidelines when you define your constructor. As you can see, constructor has the same name as your class. That's the first guideline or rules. So circle and the circle for the constructor class name same. Second guideline is constructor does not have any return type, even void return type. So if you compare second constructor with methods, it doesn't have a return type. And then it doesn't even have even void return type, because in methods, if you don't have a return type, we define void. Or if we have a return type, we specify data type. But constructor, you don't have any return type. Just one more thing to remember, when we use constructor, we can invoke our constructor using the new operator. Again, you don't have to memorize it. It's kind of straightforward once you get used with it. Important thing is, if you need constructors explicitly, you may need to define explicitly. If you just need to use default constructor only, then you may have option to not to define any constructor. Again, constructor use a new operator. When you're referring to methods belongs to class, you use a dot operator here. Again, let me show you one more thing. So here I use the terms called instance variable. That actually belongs to the instance or object during the runtime. So we have same name, radius equal to 0, radius equal to 3. It means we have two different objects. So both of them happen to be instance variable, belongs to that particular object. This case of my circle. The second one I define as my circle number 2. So this is another instance variable of my circle 2 object. Again, happen to be same name. The both radius equal to 0 and the 3 belongs to its own object. That's why we call it as an instance variable of an object. Then if you look at the circle class, when we say radius, we normally say variable. This actually refers to as a class variable. Again, it's not an instance variable, it's a class variable. That's all. Thank you.